I want to welcome you to our first presentation that we're hosting at the Southern Appalachian Plant Society. As most of you are aware, we're also known as SAPS because, of course, we're kind of SAPS about loving plants and gardening. Now, before we hear from Natalie about the latest results of the University of Tennessee vegetable trials, I'd like to remind folks that if you've not already renewed or paid to join SAPS, please do so. If you were a member last year and have not yet renewed your membership, you'll be getting the upcoming February copy of our newsletter, The Wheelbarrow, but not future issues. Included with the newsletter is the application form that can be completed and mailed with the membership fee to our membership chair, Dave Rogers. If you are not yet a member and wish to join, go to our website, which is www.saps.us. Note, saps.us, not .com or .edu, etc. The membership fee is a mere $20. And as a membership, you'll be given a discount card that will get you 10% off of gardening supplies that is honored by the majority of the gardening centers here in the Tri-Cities area. Additionally, as a member, you can participate in our local garden tours that are held in June, July, and also on the plant swap that is held in October. But again, that's strictly for paid members. Additionally, as a paid member, and if you're at a meeting like this one being held by Zoom, which we are going to be typically doing twice a year, if you can't attend that particular meeting live, you can send an email to sapscontent2020@gmail.com. And once your membership is verified, the link of the recording will be sent to you. And again, that's available only to paid members, that fortune of $20. An advantage to being membership is also being able to attend meetings of our subgroup, the Herb Saplings. So I'd like to welcome you all, and also Natalie. And you've read either on our Facebook page or our website or in our newsletter just what an amazing lady this Dr. Natalie Bumgarner is, doing the gardening for the University of Tennessee, horticulture expert that she is. So over to you, Natalie.
Right. Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be able to visit with y'all digitally. I have had the great opportunity to meet many of you in person, so I see a lot of familiar names there. And I know that we are on Zoom, but we can make this as low key and as interactive as we need to. So I told Earl that I've got two screens. I'm in the office this evening, so I kind of slid the chat box over to the other screen, and if you have any questions or comments or anything, I can kind of see them as they're coming up, so we can make this as interactive as y'all would like this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we are going to be talking about the joys of vegetable trials. So many of you who know me know that I'm kind of a vegetable person by training, and so some of the work that we're going to be showing is what I do in the spring and in the summer and in the fall, and it is a great way to combine research and extension activities. In fact, several of the names that I see here have been some of our trial participants, so in sort of indirect ways, you may actually be looking at some of your own trial data here. So gardening with data, some of the recent updates from our home garden variety trials. And so in this world of gardening and kind of in the extension sector in which I live, one of the most common questions that we see is, of course, what should I grow? And when we think about this topic of gardens or the non-commercial sector, it's really hard to create very much data for that, right? There's not a lot of trials. We have the All-American selections that we can lean on, but that might be one spot per state. So it definitely doesn't cover the whole state and things like that. So in the time that I've been in Tennessee, what I've kind of worked to do is build a combination of different trial systems so that we can get the best data for you as gardeners, or when you're interacting in the community, do the best job to answer questions as possible. So this is kind of a combination of on-station trials as well as our citizen science home garden variety trial program. So we have great folks collaborating with us all over the state, and we have combined to create the data that we share and that you all are going to see tonight. So this is, of course, the traditional model. This is actually at the organic farm right outside of Knoxville, a little bit south of town here. And this is where I like to spend my summer evenings, actually, mostly. And so a lot of the tomato, pepper work gets done here. And I always do a full set of the home garden variety trials actually on site in the trial plots as well. So everything that our trialers are growing across the state, we're growing here in Knoxville as well. And so, of course, the fun is that, you know, it's full replicated trials, a lot of volume, but the challenge is that it's a lot of volume. And on most typical years, we harvest and donate typically about 5,000 pounds or so. One of our master gardeners here in Knox County works with a food gleaning and donation nonprofit, the Society of St. Andrews, and so we're able to donate all of the produce from the trials. And then, of course, we have the collaborative model. These are a couple pictures from some of our trials, and this is actually what a lot of the data that we're going to talk about tonight is from our home garden variety trial, which actually has now completed 6 years worth of data. And so we're going to talk a lot about some of the favorites that we have seen in those trials. So kind of the nuts and bolts of how this trial works is we, in the wintertime and in the early part of the season, we're selecting trials and kind of those comparisons. And so typically what we have are two cultivars that are similar, right? They're both bush beans or they're both green zucchini, but they are different in key ways that make them a good comparison for each other. So lots of times we'll do the industry standards along with new ones, or an heirloom, old favorite beside a hybrid. And then, you know, we come up with a catalog. That's what we're doing right now. I actually have already made the comparisons for next year, but we haven't, well, you can't really see it, but back behind me, there's a whole bunch of boxes that have a lot of the seeds already in hand for the 2023 trial. Then we'll be recruiting participants, marches, a whole bunch of envelopes being packed and mailed out, and then we'll communicate throughout the season. October, November, December are data evaluation time, and then we prepare the trial report. So this has been a ton of fun because of how many people we get to connect with throughout the whole season. And so the first year, we just had a few, actually all master gardeners who were the trial participants, but over the course of time, we now have, last year was our high, over 220 people participated and over 900 trials were sent out. So it's really been fun. And oftentimes what we try to do is it's a lot of direct seeded warm season vegetables because those are what we tend to have the most success with. Over time, we add in some cool season vegetables. As we've gotten a little bit more timely with our shipping, it's been easier to get spring cool season vegetables in the ground, herbs and flowers, and lots of times we'll throw in some pollinator or a special youth trial. Actually, Earl and I were talking about this sort of data a little bit as we were getting started. And one of the really interesting things for me, kind of as an educator, as a researcher, is learning about the way that our trial gardeners are growing. And so of those 220 people, they actually had an average of 24 years of gardening experience. And you look at that number and you think, wow, like that is a lot. But honestly, you know, like I have more than 24 years of gardening experience, and many of you have a lot more than that on me. So if you think about the people that had 30 and 40 and 50 years of gardening experience, we actually had a lot of people with 1 and 2 and 4. So it's actually a good mix of participation that we have. This data here at the bottom is also really interesting because the first couple of years, we just kind of had people send in the trials that worked, right? But we didn't have a very good tabulation of what wasn't working well. And so the past few years, what we said is no matter what happens with your trial, please fill out the evaluation. And it was really interesting because last year, and I know this won't be a surprise to many of you, was one of the toughest gardening years that we have seen. We actually had close to 40% of people who had some struggle with one of their trials. So whether it was timing, germination, watering, some kind of an issue. So this kind of helps us get a sense of what the year looked like overall. This was actually the data that Earl and I were talking about. And the fact is that we now have over half of the people who participate who are growing in raised beds or in containers. So we have scaled down our growing system, which in some ways means that our cultivar selection and our management need to get even better because the stakes are high when we're growing in smaller systems. And this will also be interesting to you. We kind of get a sense of how people are managing their crops. So 14% reported that they didn't use fertilizer, 25% use compost alone, 33% use compost and some combination of organic fertilizer, and then we had between 25 and 30% that use conventional. So this just gives you a sense of, we could take a poll. I don't have a poll ready. I should have done that for our group this evening, but I bet these numbers would be rather similar to the way you all grow your vegetables. So I think these are pretty good representative numbers. So what do we ask people? Well, we ask them to compare the two cultivars. These are the cowpeas or the black-eyed peas from this year's trial. We asked them if one did better or if they were the same. We asked them on a scale of 1 to 10, and we asked them a very important question, which is, would you recommend this cultivar to other gardeners in Tennessee? And so that kind of helps us get over the hurdle of, well, it grew fine, it produced well, but I didn't like it, right? That's a good thing to know. But would you recommend it for others? And so it kind of gets past the personal preference to the performance for the whole state. And so those are the numbers that we'll talk about a lot. And what I'm going to do is just kind of share some of our recent favorites from about the last 3 or 4 years of data. We're not going to talk about sensory evaluation. I put up this picture because it always to prove that occasionally I do cook food, but really the only time that I cook food is like in the summertime when the trials are coming in. And I will carefully saute my green beans so that I have them in different parts of the skillet. That way I can compare the cultivars. Yeah, my family and friends are really impressed that time of year because I make them eat all of their green beans in little separate piles on different parts of the plate so that they can give me evaluations. Good fun. So I am going to kind of roll through some pictures and some numbers. But what I hope is that this is just kind of a fun, oral snapshot. Don't feel like you need to, write stuff down, because pretty much everything that I'm going to be talking about is either currently in a publication that I can give you a link to right now, or it will be in just a couple of weeks when we get this year's done. So we always do a home garden variety trial report, and then we kind of have a rolling list of our favorites from the past several years, which is the last few pages of this report. So all this information you'll be able to access on the website, and I'll bounce you some links when we get to the end. So what we're really going to do is just kind of go through some of the crops that we trial a lot and just share some of the favorites from each one of those crop groups. And just so I have some sense that I'm not putting everybody to sleep at home. If you have favorites of these crops that maybe we haven't trialed or you think we should, or that you want to share with other folks, then by all means put them in the chat as we go, and we can kind of have a running list of some of your favorite cultivars in each one of these categories. So green beans, a staple of the Southern or Appalachian garden. And what have we learned about beans over the past few years in our trials? Well, we have learned that we like green beans, bush beans, pole beans, heirloom beans, and we are open-minded about southern peas, cowpeas, black-eyed peas, and we've even had some good results over the years in edible soybeans. However, we have found that French fillet beans are a personal choice, and we have to be careful with those. So what are some of our favorites bush beans? These are probably the 3 highest rated bush beans that we've had over the years. When you get past about an 8, that's a really high rating for our trialers on that scale of 1 to 10. And so this is the way kind of I'll share a lot of this information for you. So the number is, of course, on a rating on a scale of 1 to 10. And then the percentage is going to be the would you recommend it to other gardeners in the state of Tennessee. And so when you get those 90s and 100s, like that is a very strong statement about how well they perform for people. So Provider is a really nice early kind of medium green bean. And so that's Provider right now, and just really good productivity out of those beans. This is Contender. Contender was had a lot of good comments for high yield and productivity. This was in the 2021 trial, and the other one that we trialed was Wyatt. And I like to show these pictures beside each other because many of you are native Appalachian longtime bean growers. And so when you look at those two, there's probably what you're seeing is that more traditional bean look on the left and a more processing bean look on the right. And so that we have tended to see, good productivity, good performance out of those more dark green, straight processing green bean types of products. But oftentimes we'll see a trend or just a little bit higher yield and rating out of some of those really traditional. And lots of times we'll get really good comments on, flavor. And I don't want to make generalizations about, generations, but lots of times folks who have grown up with more of a garden bean type of, background will appreciate some of those more traditional garden beans. I made a joke about filet beans, and it is so the story, my favorite story about filet beans is probably 3 years ago, that Mascot, the 2019 trial, and that's Mascot on the right. It is a petite filet bean. And if you're growing in raised beds or containers, it can be a really great cultivar because it's only about an 8 to 10 inch plant. But in that trial that year, we had Mascot growing, and I had a trialer email me in the middle of the year, and she said, "What is up with this ridiculous bean? Like, it only gets about 4 or 5 inches long, and it's just tiny, and it just never produces any beans. I just leave it there, just little and short and skinny, and there's no beans." And I emailed her back and I said, that's a very accurate statement. It's a petite filet bean. Like, it's just really not going to fill out very well. And she was like, "Well, I hate it." and so if people are expecting a beautiful plump bean, then they will be disappointed. But we have had, that's actually Maxabel on the left there. And that's probably the highest rated filet bean, actually one of the very highest rated bush beans that we've had. And I like to put these pictures beside each other because you can see one of the reasons why people really like Maxabel. It is a long, slender bean, and it picks fast. So your bucket or your bag fill up faster. It is a little bit larger plant than what we'll see for that Mascot, but still, works fine in raised beds or in smaller spaces. We have also enjoyed doing a few kind of novelty or colored beans. That's amethyst in the background there. It is a very standard kind of bush bean conformation, but with this beautiful purple until, of course, you cook it, and then it turns dark green. And then last year we did a kind of a yellow wax bean and a filet bean in the trial, and you can see the Borsalino is the yellow or the wax bean, and they were gorgeous together. This is actually a picture from one of our trialers, and while there wasn't a statistically significant difference, you can see the trend was that people did like that yellow bean. Actually, in 2023, we're going to have an all wax bean trial to really get at some of those differences between the taste and the texture. Lots of times that we'll see in those wax beans. Pole beans have always been one that we always include in the trial. These are actually 2022 numbers, so these are hot off the presses, and this is very typical of what we'll see. Lots of times we'll kind of trial an old standard, and we'll trial a newer option. And in this particular case, Kentucky Wonder was significantly higher rated than its newer trial compatriot there, Northeaster. And so you can kind of see it had really good comments for health and for flavor. We didn't have an heirloom in the trial in 2022, but we have spent 2 years in 2020 and 2021 growing some of our local heirlooms. And so there's actually some great kind of East Tennessee, Western North Carolina options in there. So Cherokee Trail of Tears, which I think I have a picture in here pretty soon, did very well in the 2021 trial. Turkey Crawl, one of our favorites. Actually, I tend to think of Turkey Crawl as a little bit more of kind of a Southern Kentucky, maybe upper middle Tennessee, but I bet there's some of y'all who have grown it. This is beautiful. Rattlesnake is an heirloom, not so much, Southern Appalachia specific or anything, but those are some of our highest rated. Lazy Housewife didn't do as well in 2020. I don't know if that was a prejudice against its name, or actually it was kind of lower productivity. We really got good productivity out of the rattlesnake. So that's a really pretty rattlesnake bean. These are like my glamour shots right there. And this is the Cherokee Trail of Tears. So it is a dark bean, but you can see just a little bit of purple edges, a smaller bean than we'll see out of, say, the Kentucky Wonder or the rattlesnake, which is also in the picture, but a really unique cultivar. It was actually collected and given to Seed Savers Exchange over the past recent decades from a gardener in Oklahoma. So of course we can't completely prove this, but to the best of everyone's knowledge, it may have actually traversed the Trail of Tears in the late 1830s, and that's Turkey Crawl right there. So one of our kind of regional favorites that we're familiar with. And Earl, we did actually grow yard-long beans in the trial. That was the youth trial in 2021. And we got really good performance out of one of the red cultivars, actually outperformed Python, the green one. And that picture I think that I showed of this may have been what made you think of it, the gardener on the ladder. That's a community garden in Knox County, and that was his asparagus bean trial that year. So we did get good performance. I don't think I have a slide that shows them, but we do have in our report some good yard-long bean. Cowpeas, the first time we grew them, or black-eyed peas, were this year, and I actually talked to some of my middle Southern Tennessee colleagues, and so we got recommendations for what some of their favorites were. And pink-eyed purple hull did well. These can be a good cover crop. There's lots of good ecology that can go with those. So corn and beans, right? The staples of the Southern garden. And so what have we learned about sweet corn over our trial years? That's it. That's about what we've learned about sweet corn. We don't have a ton of good sweet corn data because we just get a lot of great comments from our trialers about wildlife damage, and also less in jest. Because we have so many people growing in containers and raised beds, sweet corn has been a trial crop that's been harder to get really high numbers. So green beans, we always get very good returns. We also have very good returns and really good evaluations on cucumbers. So what have we learned about cucumbers over the past few years? Well, we've learned that you absolutely have to do the trials to know the results. And we also have learned that we have high standards for cucumbers. So we really get good evaluations from our gardeners, which have helped us over the years to kind of refine the list. So this is the only data that I have from the first year of the trial, but to me, it showcases why it is that citizen science and the trials that we do are important. In the 1930s, Straight 8 was released. It was an All-American selection winner. And the first year that we did the trials, I was like, you know what, we're going to do a classic. We're going to grow Straight 8s, and we're going to trial them against one of the newest cultivars that we have with good downy mildew resistance, which is one of the big challenges that we have. I should have introduced this. This is Straight 8, and this is SB47 0.19. So this is actually a picture from the trial that corresponds with this year. And so you could tell the difference in the picture. There was less downy mildew over here than there was on that left side of the picture. And even with that disease resistance, it was a wipeout, right? So disease resistance is important, but it is not a be all end all. And I think that's a really important thing for us to learn. Another important thing that we want to keep in mind is that sometimes we don't necessarily always see the benefit of some of those purported disease resistance. So this was last year's, or 2021 trial years. And I was really excited to trial county fair. So one of the challenges that I have in the trials, and I hear a lot from people, is bacterial wilt. So bacterial wilt is a bacterial disease that is spread by the feeding of spotted and striped cucumber beetles. So, you have to spray insecticides or early if you're going to control those vectors. It's challenging disease that just takes the vines down. And so county fair is a cultivar that is reported to have at least some resistance to bacterial wilt, more because it's less attractive for feeding to the beetle. And it may, but we did not really see that effect in our trials. And you can actually see that the cultivar that didn't really have any special disease resistance tended to be rated higher. So, it may show up in other years, but for us, it was not something that jumped out. Some of our favorites over the years, and this is a fun one because we often see very good performance out of the hybrids. We also see very good performance out of some of the open pollinated cultivars. So I always try to have that balance in the trial. And so General Lee has always been a hybrid that has done well. Anytime you get in those mid 7s, it's been pretty good for cucumber ratings. And Markhamore 76 has always been a really good performer. And it's an open pollinated cultivar. And if you've grown those, it's a little bit slender, a little bit longer than is typical. We got a question about vectors in terms of deer. And to my knowledge, I think that it is more about the mouth parts and the feeding of those cucumber beetles. I don't think that our larger four-legged critters would spread those as much. I think that it has to do with kind of the mouth parts and the feeding of the insects. But boy, they can do a good enough job spreading it without any help. These are, actually, while I was talking about cucumber beetles, this is a good picture to illustrate it. We had thin-skinned cultivars in the trial, which have always done well productivity-wise. Kids like them, the snackers, but we do tend to see a little bit more feeding damage from cucumber beetle, and that's what you're seeing right there. And this is actually a little bit scabbed over, but it's always worse on the thin-skinned and the seedless and the cucumber cultivars that have low bitterness. So this was the just this past year's trial. That is Southern Delight there on the back, and that is Bristol on the front. And Bristol has about as much disease resistance as any cultivar that's on the market right now. Some of the zucchini yellows, some downy, some powdery, and so not surprisingly, it did well. And what was a challenging year? Then one of the ones that we trialed for the first time last year were kind of some Asian specialty cucumbers. And so we did Shintakawha as well as Tasty Green. And so Shintakawha was a darker green, and Tasty Green are these big ones here in the back, just really large fruit that stayed pretty tender. We got good comments about low bitterness. And maybe y'all were just a little bit cooler. Maybe you didn't have as much of a struggle, but I know here and across a lot of the state, I got a lot of questions last year about cucumber bitterness. That hot stretch that we had in June when the big first flush of fruit was coming on, it was a challenging year for bitterness because of that heat stress. So, any comments that we got last year about low bitterness, I would kind of take seriously because it was such a challenging year. And 8.5 is pretty good. These are from a couple of years past. We've grown Diva and we've grown Greenlight, and typically, gotten good performance out of these smaller snacker cucumbers. Greenlight doesn't have that disease resistance profile. This is it on the right, right here. But for porches, for smaller spaces, if you really want a lot of kind of small fruit, it's a great option. So beans, cucumbers, and squash, as you might imagine, are some of the highest participation crops that we have, and we really had fun with the squash and the zucchini over the years. So we have a very discerning audience for green zucchini, very much like we do for green beans. But our trialers have really had good comments about a lot of the yellow squash and the yellow zucchini. So desert right here, now this is desert here on the left, is one of the highest rated green zucchinis that we have had. And you can see, it actually beat out, this is Green Machine on the left. These are the 2020 trials. And a 9.0 is about as high as we've ever seen out of a green zucchini. So this was a really good year. Desert has, one of the things that we're seeing with zucchini is we're seeing more like mosaic viruses. And so a lot of these newer hybrid cultivars are going to have more resistance to some of those viral type diseases. And both of these would fall in that category. This was last year's, and I think this may have been one of the most beautiful trials that we had. Boston Nova is an All-American Selections winner that has done well in previous trials, but it met its match last year. And so at the top of your screen there, you see Green Tiger, which got almost a 9 in a rating and 100% recommendation from our trialers. And so it was one of the best performing zucchini that I've seen. It was the highest yielder in my trial plots in Knoxville. The only thing that I will say that was a detriment against it was that it's darker green. And in a lot of my trials, I will often have college students, students who are helping with the trial and some of the summer management. And it was so big and dark, it just blended right in with the leaves. And so they missed more of these green tigers than they did this lighter green Bossa Nova. And we had some giant monster green tiger over mature fruit coming out of those trials last year. But it just kept producing fruit, even with those great big baseball bats that we were harvesting. So yellow zucchini has been one that's always done well. I honestly, most of the time I have a hypothesis for why something has done well. And the first year that we trialed yellow zucchini, they just had skyrocketing ratings, both of the cultivars. I think people just really thought they were fun and novel. And so that was the first time that we did yellow zucchini trials. The numbers have kind of come back down to earth, but we've still had very good performance. This has been one of my favorites that we've grown over the last few years. This is chiffon, and I just think that is a beautiful yellow color. It looks like a stick of butter. It's a little bit blunt on the end and has a real mild taper. And so that was one of my favorites from the 2021 trial. And you can see it did, almost an 8 rating with almost 90%. So very good percentage. Now I will be interested. You can actually put in the chat box. You can tell me if this agrees with your experience in your own garden. But over the course of the 8 years or so worth of trials that I've done in Knoxville, I have pretty consistently gotten higher yields out of yellow squash than I have out of zucchini. And of course, they do have a longer vining habit, but I've just gotten a longer harvest window. And so we tend to, most of the time in the squash trials, the yellow squash will be the highest performer. And these are some of our favorites over the years. This is Zephyr right here on the left. This is Tempest right there in the middle. And this was the 2019 trial, which may have been like one of the best rated trials that we had. They just 100% of people would recommend both of them, which is just kind of stunning. And so we keep trying to find something that might be able to beat one of those two cultivars. Tempest is actually bred by Johnny's Seeds, and it is bred as a chef cultivar. So we get good comments on kind of its nuttiness and its flavor. So it has a good flavor profile as well as having very good productivity. So we brought back Tempest in 2021, and this was kind of the heavyweight squash battle. And there wasn't a statistically significant difference, 8.8 and 8.4. And that's grand prize that you see there on the lower end of your screen. And it was just a very prolific producer. It's probably more of a commercial cultivar, strong disease resistance package. You can see a smooth, straight neck. And once again, 100% of people would recommend both of those. So it was just a really strong performance out of both of those cultivars. You can, for those of you who have kind of moved south from our northerly locations, I grew up in West Virginia. I've worked and grew for several years in Ohio, and I did not ever grow good muskmelons until I got to Tennessee. And these are honestly probably my favorite things to grow because they just really taste good most years. And so some of our favorites in the trials, this is actually Sugar Cube right here. This is about the height of my culinary expertise. And it is a personal sized melon. So most of the time they'll be between 2 and 3 pounds. And the year that we trialed those, we tried them against kind of a French melon, and Sugar Cube just, blew it out of the water. The other cultivar that folks have loved in our trials is Ambrosia, 9.3. Like, that is a crazy high evaluation, one of the highest really that we've ever gotten in the trials. And I don't think I have a picture of Ambrosia in the slide set, but it is a little bit lighter orange flesh and it ripens quickly. So it's one that you just really need to be on the ball and pick because it's a very traditional Southern muskmelon, aromatic, tender flesh, that ripens fast. So, but it slips well. So if you're familiar, with slipping, so slipping is when the stem pulls away from the vine easily. Actually, that's what happened right there. So it's a really good way to know when they're ripe, and both Sugar Cube and Ambrosia slip well. So once you kind of get the hang of it, it is pretty straightforward to know when they're ripe. Trifecta was one of the most disease-resistant cultivars that I could find. It's actually bred out of the Cornell breeding program. So the South whipped up on New York in that trial. These are hot off the presses 2022 muskmelon values, and this is Sugar Cube. It wasn't officially in the trial this year, but I always grow Sugar Cube because it tastes so good. And I put it in this picture so you could kind of tell. This is Ambrosia, Aphrodite in the background. And so you can kind of see the difference. We got some big melons out of the Athena and Aphrodite trial, and they pretty much battled to a draw. These are newer hybrids, so they both have some fusarium and some powdery mildew resistance, pretty large traditional fruit. And they kind of walk that border between having some ability to be kind of a farmer's market, maybe short distance shipping, as well as a very good garden cultivar. So, good ratings out of both of those cultivars. And so one of my favorite, I'll tell you my favorite muskmelon story, which has to do with Athena. And this is from, probably half a dozen years ago, one of the first years that I grew muskmelons. So like in our trials, we have drip irrigation, and I try to manage it carefully because you can really influence the sugar content of your muskmelons by the water volume at fruit fill, right? Because soluble solids are really just the ratio of sugar, in comparison to water in those fruit. And so if you get a lot of rain, or if you irrigate a lot during the later stages of maturation, then you can actually push down the sugar content in the melons simply by diluting them as those cells fill up with a lot of water. So I always try to back off on the irrigation, but on this particular year, late July, August, we had a lot of rainfall. And so I wasn't really able to run these a little bit dry like I used to push up the sugar content. And we did taste trials at the Fall Gardeners Festival in Cumberland County over on the plateau. And so we were doing taste trials of melons, and I had a really experienced gardener that I knew, come through and do these taste trials. And he's sort of like the Cumberland County version of Earl, just a great gardener, right, who knew his stuff. And so he walked through and he did these trials, and he said, Natalie, they tasted all right. Like, they were all fine. It was okay. But my favorite cultivar is Athena. You should have grown some of those. And I just knew that, like, I had to tell him the truth. I was like, well, I'm sorry to tell you that actually one of those that you just ate was Athena. And he just kind of shook his head and he said, well, you've messed it up somehow. and so I was like, but it rained a lot. I promise, I know. But this year we did have some really great tasting Athenas. And so I may have to, go back and tell him I think I've made up for messing them up. So we always do some okra in the trial, and not surprisingly, Clemson's finalists and open pollinated cultivar that our neighbors over in South Carolina developed several years ago has always performed well. We've grown it in 2 or 3 years. This is kind of a light green. One of our favorite hybrids that has done well is jambalaya. So you can tell a difference in the pod color. I am not a great evaluator of okra as far as taste and texture, but productivity and color, I'm pretty good on. This is Carmine, which really did well in the 2021 trial. Another that we really enjoyed in earlier trials was Candlefire, which is an All-American Selections winner. And the biggest difference between Carmine, which you see here, and Candlefire, which isn't pictured, is that Candlefire is smooth, and Carmine will kind of have those ridges. We have done some cool season crops, and I love lettuce. I actually did my PhD research in lettuce, so lettuce always holds a special place in my heart. But it can be challenging in our Tennessee springs because of how rapidly the spring temperatures warm up. I actually think that it's much better as a fall crop, but that's really hard to collect data. So oftentimes we'll ask folks to grow it as a spring crop. And so this is Sandy from the 2021 trial. It's an All-American Selections winner that's kind of a deer tongue oak leaf. And almost a 9. That's a very high rating, and it is strong against bolting. I like the oak leaves also because now don't take this as a challenge. It's possible, I think, but you very rarely see tip burn on an oak leaf. It's an open head, so you get good air movement through there, and we've just really gotten good quality out of those oak leaves. Muir is a little bit more of a green crisp. It did very well in the trial as well, but Sandy, we really got good ratings on. We did Swiss chard, so it's a cool season crop that can get a little bit later into the spring with still really good quality. Very similar ratings out of All-American Selections winning Bright Light, as well as kind of a really beautiful red rhubarb. So now these are some 2022 numbers. So this was kind of breaking out of the box and trying some new cultivars. And one thing that we really saw that was interesting in the 2022 data is that the challenging year that we had tended to kind of separate some of those recommendations with the overall ratings. 8.0, 7.6, pretty good ratings, but people still weren't completely sure if they would recommend them to their friends and neighbors. I will say that kohlrabi has been one of the more kind of stress resilient brassicas in the cabbage family that we've grown. I have even transplanted these as like a May transplant and harvest them in hot weather in June and gotten good quality. So Forst is a recent All-American Selections winner. You can see good, solid center there, not pithy. So I think that kohlrabi could be fun as a, raised bed, small space, even if you don't get it in the earliest part of the growing season. Over the past few years, we've also always added in some herb crops. So Basil, we have mostly done Genovese basil, and we do try to kind of tailor it towards some of the common diseases that we see. Newton has fusarium resistance, and devotion, as well as this coming out of the Rutgers breeding program, but they are bred with downy mildew resistance. Now, basil downy mildew is a different, species than cucumber downy mildew, but it is similar in the fact that we will actually see the impact, we'll see the signs of it on the underside of the leaf. So on the upper side of the leaf, you'll typically see kind of chlorosis, some yellowing, but if you turn over that underside of the leaf, you may actually see the fuzzy gray to black distinct signs of that disease. And we don't really have sprays that are effective. We may not want to put them on our basil anyway. So most of the time, resistance is one of the best options that we have. And so the cultivars coming out of that program have not bulletproof resistance, but will get us a little bit later into the season. I should have put in a couple pictures of downy mildew, but if you have seen late August into September decline in your basil, there's a very good chance that downy mildew is what you have seen. And last year, we did fennel for the very first time. So this was Antares, which is a recent All-American Selections winner, good pollinator, kind of host plant, and not terrible ratings, but that recommendation was not very good. We had some people that struggled with some of the germination challenges on some of their fennel. So I know that I've only got a few minutes left, so I promise I'll be very quick, but I'll show you a few pictures of some of my favorite peppers. So what we've really seen with peppers is that some of the newer hybrids that have really good disease resistance, we have seen some of those differences show up in some of the yields on some of the bells. Taste quality is important, especially if we're talking about some of those roasting peppers. And oftentimes we've seen a little bit more consistency in our bell yields than we have out of our jalapenos than we have out of our bells. And so that is it's not terribly surprising, right? Because a lot of the bells that we're growing now would be bred for, high productivity over a short time period. They're kind of like, some of them are, almost a determinate type. And say California, or a very moderate but high productivity vegetable growing climate. Whereas our summers are warm, they're cool, they're wet, they're dry. And so some of those bell pepper, productivity breeding programs are not necessarily bred for the variability that we see. So this was a year that I grew a whole bunch of different bell peppers. Playmaker, Red Knight have bacterial leaf spot resistance, and Playmaker actually also has some Phytophthora, which is a soil-borne fungal-like organism. So you can see, and kind of the older open pollinated like keystone resistant giants, a little bit lower. We've had good productivity out of some of the gorgeous cultivars like Snowball and Islander. These are actually immature pictures. They'll mature to an orange to red. Revolution, really high disease resistance with bacterial leaf spot and with Phytophthora. But I will say that honestly, I think some of my favorite peppers to grow are the Italian roasting peppers. And hopefully you're familiar with Carmen. It's an All-American Selections winner. That's what you're looking at in the background. Hybrid, not a huge amount of disease resistance. It doesn't have bacterial leaf spot resistance. But I put that in there to say that you can kind of see the difference. Gatherer's Gold and Italian Sweet are kind of the open pollinated cultivars, while these are the hybrids up here. So we do sometimes see a little bit higher productivity out of some of those newer hybrids. These are just some pretty pictures. Large yellow roasting peppers, Escamillo, a little bit smaller Italian Sweets. And then we have seen really good productivity out of the jalapenos. So, if you like jalapeno flavor, Emerald Fire, Jalafuego, Altiplano. Felicity is actually a low heat jalapeno, so it's been one that has done really well in the trials too. In fact, 2022 was a crummy pepper year. I didn't really get very good yields. 2021 was a pretty decent pepper yield, and Felicity actually was the highest performing pepper in the plot. All right, so we could talk about tomatoes all evening, all week, but I just want to share a little bit about some of our favorites over the last few years. So what have we learned about tomatoes? We have learned that 1984 got something right with the Celebrity, which was an All-American Selections winner that year. We've seen good returns out of some of the newer disease management, some of the resistance options like early blight and late blight, but we can't necessarily have it all yet. All of the best of all the disease-resistant hybrids combined with all of the best of some of the heirlooms, but we're starting to make some progress down that road. So this is just a little bit of a snapshot of data from a couple 3 years ago when I grew a large number of determinate cultivars. And so Iron Lady, Defiant have both early and late blight resistance. So, you know, they held their own, but Celebrity, the 1984 AAS winner, is just kind of the one to try and beat. And we really haven't found a determinate that can knock it off. But there are some good disease-resistant options. Really, these all have late blight, and some of them do have early blight. So Defiant, these are kind of smaller tomatoes, say a 4 or 5 ounce fruit. Iron Lady, Stellar, and then Plum Regal for a determinate plum tomato. This was, I think this was 2020. There was a bunch of indeterminate tomatoes this year, and this is just kind of the yield rundown. So Mountain Rouge, Big Beef, Beef Master, you know, large, beautiful fruit. That's Beef Master that you're looking at right there. Damsel is a newer hybrid that has some late blight, but not early blight resistance that I've really liked. You can see in this particular instance, some of these newer hybrids were beating out some of our older heirlooms or older hybrids like the Big Boy. That's not necessarily a make or break situation, but you can kind of see how those yields came out. These are just a few pictures. Mountain Rouge, big, beautiful pink tomato. Purple Boy, kind of a little bit more of a compact, medium-sized slicer, you know, kind of in the middle of that yield category, but just a beautiful small fruit, not as much cracking as we saw in some of the Cherokee Purple. Damsel for kind of a medium slicer that is a pink tomato. I really have enjoyed growing these for a couple 3 years. It's hard to beat Cherokee Purple. It's just a taste profile that I very much enjoy. Cherokee Carbon is a hybrid that has Cherokee Purple as a parent. We've typically seen similar yield. Both of them have the same very good flavor profile. Chef's Choice Orange, kind of a big beef type of fruit. So a globe, but really good productivity. These are 2021 yield numbers here. This is one of the fun ones from 2021. It's kind of a French, very large plum tomato, kind of a teardrop shape, very good producer. This is actually an open pollinated cultivar. Garden Treasure coming out of the University of Florida breeding program. It's a large indeterminate plant with just really very consistent large globe fruit that have anecdotally had a very good flavor profile, which is part of what they're bred for. And actually, this was the 2021 trial, which was one of the best tomato years that I have had. And some of our highest producers were actually the indeterminate paste tomatoes. So Granadero and Tyron. So that's just a little snapshot of some of our favorites when it comes to tomatoes. uthort.com, you can find all the trial information. It'll have links to our home fruit and vegetable calendar, as well as trial reports from previous years and a lot of fun information on a lot of these different trials. So here's to a great 2023 garden season.